Welcome to the Bellevue Chamber webcast for Thursday, April 30th, 2020. Today we're joined by Washington State Secretary of Commerce, Lisa Brown, Steve Mitchelmore, Managing Director for the Seattle offices of Boston Consulting, and your host, Bellevue Chamber CEO, Joe Fain, as we explore back to work, planning for a safe restart.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Bellevue Chamber. I'm Joe Fain. We are very grateful that you've chosen to spend an hour of your time with us today. I want to start by thanking today's sponsor, Puget Sound Energy, for their support in bringing this important information to our members and to the public. And particularly, I want to thank their frontline utility and maintenance teams for risking their own health right now to maintain uninterrupted service to our communities during this difficult time. Now, with Governor Inslee's stay-at-home order expected to be officially extended by the end of the week, and with unclear standards in place to open businesses and send people back to work, Challenge Seattle, under the direction of former Governor Chris Gregoire, and the Washington Roundtable, headed by Steve Mullen, joined forces with Boston Consulting's Seattle office over the past month to frame the restart strategy and develop a checklist to guide companies and industries in the weeks ahead. Later this hour, we'll walk through their findings and see what steps your organization should be taking to prepare. I also want to remind you that the magic of these webcasts come from the interaction that they allow between the audience and the presenter. So please use that Q&A function on your screen and send us some questions. But right now we are joined by a friend of mine, our Washington State's Secretary of Commerce, former colleague of mine in the Senate. Secretary Brown is a key advisor to Governor Inslee on economic matters related to COVID and has been hard at work supporting our state's businesses during this challenging time. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here, Joe.
So tell me, we can go into the specifics in a moment, but I just have to ask, you're trying to run this operation from home like so many people are. What is a day in the life of the Secretary of Commerce right now with everything that you're juggling?
Like everybody else, I'm almost everybody else except our frontline workers, of course, who we appreciate so much. I'm teleworking. It goes from phone conference to Zoom to whatever it might be. We are engaged right now with, as we know, the economic impact of this COVID crisis is really unprecedented, probably the biggest economic downturn that we've experienced in most of our lifetime, certainly your lifetime, since you weren't there for the Great Depression. And we're working on both economic analysis with BCG, as you mentioned, as well as the strategy with the governor's office for looking at how our state's economy, sector by sector and region by region, is being affected by the economic downturn and restriction in activities, and how we can safely re-engage economically, rebuild broken supply chains, and create a path forward for productive activity for businesses and workers and employees.
So tell us, the governor put together a dashboard yesterday that kind of indicated 7 of the criteria and data points that he's looking at. Is there clear actions associated when those dials reach certain levels, or is it...
And I'm not hearing you right now. I hope you're hearing me.
Oh, dear. Are you hearing me now?
I am hearing you now.
There we go. Sorry about that. I was just asking if, since the governor yesterday rolled out a dashboard of some metrics that he's really looking towards, things along the reproductive rate of the disease, the adequate supply of PPE. Is there a sense of a set number on any of those metrics that the governor's looking for before action to reduce restrictions will be put in place, or are these just, is he just putting this out there as a means of everybody knowing what the metrics that matter are?
I think that the governor's making an announcement tomorrow that will put the pieces of the plan together, and that means the public health metrics that you just spoke to, but also what do we see as the phases of reopening, what types of activities occur within each of those phases, And there's also a discussion about the possibility of some counties or regions going faster based on the public health metrics there and the interest of the political and healthcare leadership to be able to attest to the ability to test, contact trace, and make sure their healthcare system can handle any hopefully rare reigniting of the virus. So that is the plan that's being put together for the governor's announcement tomorrow afternoon.
And you just talked a little bit about some element of local control. I know that's been a hot button issue among local public health departments as well as the business community, where there's some desire to see local control because maybe some folks can get back to work sooner because of the case rates in some areas, but then there's other folks that have a concern about it because differing standards in differing counties, different authorities to provide regulation and advice to companies could get pretty murky as we go on. What's your sense of where the governor's office is leaning now?
Well, my sense of it is that it will still remain controversial no matter what decision is made. And I'm here on the border with Idaho. Much of our state also borders Oregon. So whenever there's any inconsistency in adjacent geographies, that's going to lead to some challenges. I do believe that two things we know for sure. One is that our more vulnerable populations, that is people with certain kinds of diseases or disorders that make their immune system more vulnerable, and our older populations will probably need to remain social distancing for quite some period of time. And those of us who care about those members of our families and communities will have to be also doing our business and social activities in new ways to protect them. I think that we know that will go on for a period of time, probably until we have a vaccine and much more widespread testing. On the other hand, I think we know because of essential businesses that are already have been operating during this period of time, and that's everything from some manufacturing facilities to some retail facilities, that there are practices and safety guidelines that can be followed and that can reduce risk. And there are some types of economic activities that are just inherently lower risk because they don't involve necessarily person-to-person contact. So Commerce is working with the governor's office to make recommendations on how we can re-engage in low-risk activities or re-engage in activities like retail and manufacturing with new safety standards in place. And I believe we will be drawing heavily on the kind of work that's been done by promoted and encouraged by Challenge Seattle with the Boston Consulting Group to develop checklist plans for businesses. And ideally, we would be in a situation where, as with the process that happened recently with the construction industry, industry representatives, worker employee representatives, and the public health and safety entities of state government come together, agree on a plan to move forward, and that we have those plans ready to go more widely. So as the public health metrics are achieved, businesses are ready to open their doors.
So you mentioned the process that the governor took with construction, and there's a process underway in restaurants and retail. Are we envisioning that the governor would convene?
My audio is cutting in and out a little bit. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. I'm sorry. Are you able to hear me now?
I can.
Okay, great. You were referencing the construction roundtable that the governor convened to put some of the construction workers back to work earlier this week. That was a centralized in the governor's office conversation with industry and labor. Is it expected that similar industry conversations are going to be necessary, spearheaded by the governor's office before those industries go back to work? Or is there now a sense that there will be more of a ability to make decisions about your own business and industry, so long as you're following sort of a list of guidelines and principles like those that Challenge Seattle has put forward in the Boston Consulting Report?
That's a great question, and I think at this time it's still a bit of a hybrid model. So, for example, in the retail sector, Commerce is working more in the lead there with representatives of retail to work on those plans, and we also feel a particular responsibility to be translating whatever guidelines have emerged, for example, from larger businesses or corporations into a framework that can be more easily adapted by Main Street small businesses who may or may not have an association working with them or advocating for them. So we're engaged in that part of the process as well. And in conjunction with the governor's office, there's still continuing conversations going about further opening of construction and further sector by sector discussions in areas where there are some complications. But I think ultimately we will get to the phase where it's general guidance and general health and safety guidance for industries and businesses that are more widely available as we move into the different phases and the continued re-engagement of the economy.
Got a number of questions that are coming in for you here on the Q&A line, so I want to again remind folks to put their questions there. One of the questions.
I can't hear you again.
Oh no.
Now I can.
Okay, sorry about that. There are a lot of questions that are coming in right now on our Q&A line, and so I hope more folks will take advantage of that. One kind of travels back in time a little bit and has to do with determining what was an essential business and what was not, and some of the controversy around, well, if a Target or a Walmart can stay open, why not their small business retail equivalent? What were some of the decisions that came into play to draw the line between what types of organizations within a similar industry were able to be deemed essential and able to stay open?
The essential business conversation was, I think, was an evolving conversation. Not having gone through that process before, I think the Washington State started with the federal guidelines, also looked to neighboring states, and created that big picture essential business guidance. But we also know that raised a lot of questions, and those have been handled systematically by the governor's policy shop and legal affairs folks when those questions and inquiries come in. But now I think we're in many ways past that conversation. As we all know, manufacturing of airplanes was deemed essential. Manufacturing of some other things was not deemed essential. But as we move into this next phase, every type of manufacturing is critical to our basic economic vitality as a state, and certainly on a regional basis. And actually, those jobs are critical to support the service sector and retail jobs that come with them. So the question now is to use the best practices and the safety guidelines that have been established in the essential manufacturing operations and get those guidelines widely dispersed and accepted for all manufacturing facilities, as an example. And in retail, we know that grocery stores quickly adapted new practices for cleaning of equipment and face guards and limiting the number of customers, sometimes even by aisle. I've been in some stores where they've made the aisles one way, so it's easier for people to do the appropriate social distancing. The next phase is obviously extending that to all of retail and utilizing those practices. And I just want to give a shout out. Many businesses around the state have stepped up, become very innovative in ways that they're connecting with their customers, and I think their resiliency is going to be really important, as this economic downturn will probably in the short run be more serious than anything we've faced in my time in Olympia, and I've gone through two other very significant economic downturns.
You want to unpack one thing that you were talking about there, and it was around the idea of just what is the economic analysis. A lot of the data that we look at is about the health metrics and hospital utilization and death rates and infection rates and things like that. Is there any analysis being done to look at, the health costs associated with the economic situation because of the shutdown? Is there any kind of similar dashboard that's being put together so that we can understand just what kind of adverse health impacts come from increased rates of domestic violence or suicide or poverty or things like that? That's a question that comes up a lot.
Well, and it's very, very relevant, and I can just tell you anecdotally here in Spokane, I previously served on the board of our YWCA domestic violence program. Calls have significantly increased, so that's obviously an anecdote. But as you also know, our public health system operates almost on a county by county basis. So I don't think we have the same compilation of that data, but I don't need to wait for that to know that there are health consequences of the economic downturn and the economic insecurity facing families and businesses. We have people who are food insecure right now. This morning, I personally toured our food bank here in Spokane, but this morning I heard about another food bank in Central Washington where they're down to very little protein right now. So food insecurity and housing insecurity is a significant issue. And when you add to that the fact that local, state, government revenue streams are tied to our economic activity, you can see how significant this crisis is that's emerging. So what's really important to us at Commerce is that we create opportunities to communicate with businesses, large and small, and in all corners of the state about what the federal streams of funding are like, how to access them, whether it's the SBA's Paycheck Protection Program or a small business fund created in Seattle, King County, or statewide, and that we also develop our analysis by sector and by region so we can help inform state and federal policymakers who will probably need to do things on a level in terms of economic stimulus that that really takes us back to an era like the New Deal in order to be successful. So whether that's infrastructure investment and or targeted ways to create new pathways for workers that are going to be dislocated and need to have a new pathway back into the economy.
And we'll have a little plug there for next Tuesday's webcast with the Bellevue Chamber with the leaders on the House and Senate Transportation Committee to talk about infrastructure and transportation project development in light of what you're talking about right there. One other thing that you mentioned, and you're probably one of the foremost experts on it, having lived through it in 2011 and 2010, as you were the majority leader in the Senate when the state was facing its $1 billion of shortfall. We now see projections of billions of dollars on top of anything we could have previously imagined in shortfall. What do you expect the state's response to be? Legislature coming back in session, taxes on the table? Is it an all-cut situation? What kind of conversations are going on there?
Well, I also had the experience of being the Senate Ways and Means Committee in 2001 to 2003, and we said that was the biggest economic downturn since the Great Depression until the next one. So uh, that experience puts me in the mode of not being good at making predictions about what our political leaders will do, but I have actually some preferences for what they do. I would like to see potentially, if it makes sense, and the five corners can can get an agreement. I'd like to potentially see a special session before the next legislative session and have it be focused on infrastructure and stimulus. And the reason for that is I believe that it's warranted. For example, Commerce supports the Public Works Board and the Community Economic Revitalization Board, what we think of as our infrastructure, two of our infrastructure entities in Washington State, and they have a backlog of projects of nearly $1 billion. And so getting those infrastructure projects off the ground or at least organized, should there be a federal stimulus package, I think would be a good move. And I also believe that our uh, our tax structure is very volatile. The the sales and excise taxes that we rely on heavily are going to drop, are dropping as we speak. And so I've seen that the revenue impact for the state, some projections as high as $4 billion. I'm happy that there's a rainy day fund. I think worked on that with some of your colleagues, and I'm glad that's in place and that we had at least $1 billion cushion, but it's going to still be a very significant impact, and I don't see how the legislature gets a balanced budget without looking at really major reductions in state spending and possibly revenue options as well.
Commerce isn't just about planning for the recovery; it's also about responding to the emergent issues that companies have been facing and helping them navigate through some of the federal programs and a whole host of other life vest programs. What kind of efforts have you had underway through the Commerce Department or through the state for that immediate short-term help for businesses?
Yeah, we're an agency. I learned, you would think that I would have known this, but didn't necessarily know this. It's a short name and it's a long portfolio of programs that we partner with across the state. So we work with all of our economic development entities, the ADOs of each county on economic development issues. We work with all the community action agencies on certain kinds of programs like low-income energy assistance, work with all of our housing authorities and housing and developers and entities on affordable housing. So one of the first things we were able to work on was a $30 million program of contracts to every county in the state to enable them to start to ramp up for the potential of these alternate care facilities, isolation and quarantine for our homeless population, as well as people who might not be able to do shelter quarantine in their own home. And we've also recently worked on federal CARES Act dollars that are coming. Some of that's coming directly to counties like King County and Seattle, but another piece of it comes to Commerce on behalf of the smaller, more rural counties, community development block grant funds. So we're working on those program contracts, and our goal really is to turn the dollars around as quickly as we can, because we know that local governments have those needs right now, and that they are also in a position to be assessing what their priorities are. So we are using emergency rulemaking authority to turn contracts around in a much more expedited process than we would have during normal times. And so that's just a couple of examples, but there are others.
Well, I know that you've got a hard stop at 2:30 today, but I wanted to put one more question out to you before we wanted to ask one. Oh, there I came back in. I wanted to ask one more question. I know you've got a hard stop at 2:30, but what should businesses be doing right now if they're still shut down? They're looking towards the horizon, trying to figure out, should I be prepping to bring my employees back? Should I be buying masks? Should I be, moving desks around in my office so that they're 6 feet apart, or whatever the case may be? What kind of concrete direction can you give businesses right now, so that they have something that they can look forward to and do productively?
If businesses are not part of associations that are currently actively making the plan for a safe restart, we encourage them to contact us. And we also, as I said before, want to take the plans that have been developed by groups like Challenge Seattle and help translate those into guidance for our smaller and Main Street businesses. Yeah, I think it's when the phases are announced of what our plan looks like. I think most businesses will clearly see where the activities that they engage in fit in the equation. But if they don't, definitely we want to get those questions and answer them. So I see this as a very active process over the next period of time as we start preparing, as every business starts preparing for what it means for them to re-engage with their customers and with their suppliers and those they supply. And being a very internationally trade-driven state, one of the things Commerce is very interested in is continuing to interact sector by sector. So we have leads in aerospace, tech, maritime, agriculture products, life sciences and global health, et cetera, advanced manufacturing. And we foresee that in each of these sectors, there will be some unique challenges, but there may be some unique opportunities. When the governor asked people to consider retooling for PPE or testing, over 500 companies contacted us, and we have over 60 currently engaged in one stage or another of that retooling process, or already supplying the state or the private sector with needed supplies that emerged during the COVID crisis.
Well, I remember when I was a freshman senator in my first couple of weeks on the job, and I had a meeting with you in your big corner office when you were in the majority leader, and you sat me down and asked, what can Brown do for you? And well, it sounds like you're doing quite a bit for the state of Washington right now. We're very appreciative that you took some time out here today to talk to all of us. I know that you've got your staff people on the line, as well as we've got more specific questions that are coming in, and some additional resources that are being put down there in the chat box. So we want to thank you. We want to thank all the folks at Commerce, and obviously offer us as a resource to get the word out on some of the great work that you're doing, and to help put us back to work. So, Secretary, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, and thanks to everybody out there. One of the things that really rings home to me is that how much businesses care about their employees and their customers, how much we in communities value our businesses that give us the unique character of our communities. And this is a really, really challenging time. And I look forward to continue to be a partner and an advocate for our economy in this administration, and working with organizations like yours, and hearing your voices, and learning from you. So thank you very much for inviting me to be on the show.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Stay safe.
Thanks.
We're now joined by Steve Mitchelmore. He is the managing partner of the Seattle office for Boston Consulting. And as we talked about at the top of the hour, they were engaged with the Washington Roundtable and Challenge Seattle to help bring experts from epidemiology, from industry, and from all around to put together a great checklist and presentation about what businesses should be thinking about. And as the Secretary said, a framework for how we can build industry-specific plans to help put each of your organizations back to work. So, Steve, welcome. And I know you've got a great presentation for us today, so I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And hi, everyone. Hope everyone's staying safe during these challenging times. So I'm Steve Mitchelmore, Managing Director. I lead our Seattle office and I'm part of our North American leadership team. I thought I would do a couple of things today. I do want to make sure we get to the checklist, but maybe spend a few minutes, probably have too many slides in classic consulting fashion to go through. But frame it up with a little bit of context on some of the work that we're doing globally and how the U.S. compares to other markets. Share some of our findings on consumer sentiment, because I think that's going to be a lot of what all of us need to do to rebuild that consumer confidence as we try to restart. And then finally, some key themes on how to emerge from the crisis, as well as the checklist. So a lot to cover, but I think Joe, just move me along if we have questions or need to get to the checklist sooner. Got to put a legal slide in. Sorry, but the layers. Want to make sure this is again guidelines for you all to take, but at the end of the day, each business is responsible for your own actions. So how we've been thinking about this at BCG has been in three phases, and that's really the flatten phase, which we're hopefully coming out of, and then moving into the fight phase, and then the future phase. In the flatten phase, I think we've all been dealing with and are still trying to figure out how long is it going to be and how deep is it, as we think about each of the industries. As we move into the fight phase, which really takes us from now until a cure or a vaccine is in place, it is really a question of how long and how to best both not only rebound and stabilize your businesses, but also reinvent and try to thrive during that time to set yourself up for the future. And so as we think about all the different actions that leaders are taking right now with many of our clients, we're often breaking them down into these three phases. And as we look around the world, I think we're really excited by the progress that each of the countries are making in flattening, the virus and the spread. But each of them are at a different point in that flattening curve. And as we look at the forecasts from all the different, experts out there and economists, there's a wide range of what the impact's going to be across each of the different countries, both for 2020 and 2021. And a lot of that uncertainty is obviously shown in the markets, but I think it also shows up in the confidence that each of your customers have in getting back and restarting the economy. There's a few things that definitely give us confidence that the restart will continue to move forward, and definitely we're not China, but when you look to China that is ahead of us, the rebound on people starting to move, coal consumption, a few other metrics that we look at, it is coming back, and I think if we continue to focus on the health crisis first and do everything we can to keep people safe and give people confidence, we're expecting a similar trend to China here in the U.S. So with that context, I thought I would share a little bit on some of the survey work we've done from a consumer sentiment standpoint, just to give you visibility into where people's mindsets are right now as you start to re-engage. We've done the survey across 5 different markets, a representative sample, male, female, across 5 markets. And there's a couple common themes that I think is coming out. One is, obviously there is vulnerable populations that have been heavily impacted. We all see the unemployment numbers that are coming out, and that's creating a lot of fear and anxiety in the market. And it's not just the 15 to 20% that are potentially going to be unemployed, but we're seeing a much broader impact as far as over 50% in the U.S. worried about the personal finances. Many that are being careful about how they spend. In the latest survey that we did in April, 3/4 of those surveyed were really thinking hard about where they're spending overall. And they're dealing with many different changes into their habits as well. As consumer space, either working from home, try to change their how they're focusing on hygiene or where they're spending their time. But at the same time, there's a lot that's in the survey work and the feedback that we've been getting that again gives us confidence on the rebound. One is which is, consumers continue to obviously shift to digital and their online interactions, but they're missing that offline interaction. Either it's the experience of trying products, being able to just be out and shop and the pleasure that brings, or be inspired. You often are shopping online for what you think you need, but that inspiration of being able to shop and engage in the community is something that people are missing, not just in the U.S., but across all the markets that we've been surveying. I think the other thing is, despite there definitely is future forward-looking impact on how much they are going to shop going forward, a lot of the big drivers of that are related to the COVID crisis, whether that be around being close to people, making sure they're not being exposed, making sure they spend less, in areas that are higher risk. And so I think as the health professionals, policymakers, as well as businesses continue to help both address the health crisis, but then give confidence in their ability to continue fight and mitigate any challenges. Those are the primary drivers of why people are looking to potentially reduce their spend going forward. And so as those are tackled, we really do think consumer confidence will continue to grow. I think the other thing that I wanted to point to is we started to also look at, what are some of the trigger points that will regain that confidence in the U.S. And if you look at the top two rows here, available for a vaccine or no new cases, the one thing that we definitely see is that, people are not waiting for the vaccine. They definitely want to make sure, after restrictions are removed, that new cases aren't spiking, that they've definitely flattened. But as you can see, whether it be flights or hotels or local activities or restaurants or shopping, it doesn't actually change that much relative to no new cases and the vaccine. And I think that again, as long as people feel like they're safe and that there's trust, there is still this willingness to engage in activities to get restarted and go forward. The other thing that we looked at before we start to move on what to do about this going forward is around consumer traction on both transactions as well as dollar sales. And obviously this is impacting many businesses with front-facing consumer-oriented companies impacting much more than some of the other parts of the economy. So it's a very bifurcated market right now, and we see that with many of our clients. And it's fairly consistent. We've looked at credit card data, debit card data across a number of different categories. And whether you look at the US or Seattle or New York, we're seeing very similar patterns. I think the timing of each of these hit differently, with Seattle on the front end and then New York getting hit hard as well. But the US as a whole is following a very similar pattern based on the analytics that we've run so far. I think the final point on the consumer sentiment side is also just, as we've learned from past recessions and past impacts, despite this being nothing like we've seen before, when we do see sector impacts that they impact some sectors more than others, there still is winners and losers across companies. And I think that just speaks to, in each of these categories, there presents an opportunity to be innovative, to be imaginative, to get the consumers back. And I think what hopefully this shows from even '08, even in times of a large pressure, whether it be a liquidity crisis or a crisis in confidence from consumer spending, there was definitely companies that were able to win during those times. And how you think about engaging with your customers and building that trust and that confidence, we really see a wide range play out across each of the different categories that we were tracking. I think some people are having trouble with the audio, but hopefully most people can hear me. So I want to move on to how to emerge from the crisis, and then we can end on the checklist that we've been doing work with Challenge Seattle and the Washington Roundtable. We are doing a number of different data gathering exercises with our clients and companies around the world. And one of the things that we see is a lot of focus initially, and rightfully so, reacting to the health crisis and taking care of your employees, taking care of just stabilizing their business, whether it be liquidity challenges again or health challenges. And as companies have moved from reaction to more how to manage the recession, they started to look at scenario analysis and trying to understand the cost implications and trying to right size the business to be stable going forward. What we're seeing less of, and you can see this in the green bars as far as where people have taken action and where they've started to plan for it, companies are just now starting to focus on the rebound and the reimagination. And so as people start to get confidence in coming back, as they start to stabilize the business and feel like they have things under control, that's where we're really starting to see executives across a number of our client bases starting to focus on, okay, what to do now, how to restart demand, how to reach out to customers, how to rebuild that trust, how to stabilize and ready the supply chain networks that they have. And so that's really the next phase, is how to get ahead on the rebound. And then, for companies that are really facing challenges with pressure to their existing business models, starting to reimagine. And what are the moves that this crisis, where in many cases it's accelerating, 2 to 3, sometimes up to 4 years of trends that we've seen into a 2-month period. How do you reimagine and reinvent your business to be able to work in this new normal? As we've talked to a number of executives, the crisis raises a variety of client use cases and bringing workers back to work safely as they think about all the planning challenges that they have in front of them. But there's a number of things that really they're starting to focus on going forward. And that's really around how is the market going to evolve? How do they compete with their competitors? And where to make investments going forward and how to reset their strategic plans. And, one of the things that we've been working with a lot of our clients on, and also some of the state governments that we've supported as well, is there's been a lot of focus on the health metrics and in understanding what are the caseloads, what is the utilization of health capacity, but then starting to move into what are the other economic indicators and demand indicators that can really give you a little bit more of a cockpit of what's happening and what are the trends and how to react to that. And so there's a number of data sources that are out there that companies are starting to use to really pull together the key elements that are going to help them make decisions going forward, because decision processes are shortening during this time. And it's important to have your pulse on a consolidated dashboard that really helps you understand what's working, what's not, and make adjustments in really quick order. I think the biggest questions that we're facing as companies start to rebound is starting to understand, how much of these changes are going to be structural long term versus are going to be during this fight phase for the next 6 to 18 months. And that really impacts how they invest, that impacts some of the resources that they put in place, and it affects their long-term strategies. And so a lot of the questions that we're now starting to get as people start to rethink their plans is, which areas do we just have to make investments to stabilize over the next 12 months, but what areas are there going to be actually structural changes long-term that we need to really be thinking about? How do we change the way our company works? And here are just some guiding principles that I think a number of the leadership teams that we've worked with really find valuable. And it starts with just being visible and purposeful. I think purpose has been something that continues to grow in a trend for a lot of the client work that we're doing, is why do employees want to show up? Why do they want to work? What is the purpose of that company in the environment, in the community? And the more you can zero in on that why, I think that's really resonating with both employee value props, but also the customers and getting them back in. The other is, really thinking about multiple clock speeds. There's different things that you need to do now versus the long term, and how do you pass some of your team members really focusing on just now, and whether that's restarting, whether that's thinking through the checklist and what applies to you, and working with the different trade industries, but also which part of your team is starting to look around the corner and trying to anticipate the next shock or the next challenge that you're facing to be ready for that. And the final one is really just trying to find ways during this time to keep imagination alive. That is something that, in times like now is really tough, but it also provides hope, it provides inspiration, gets people excited to really think it's not just going to be this for the long term, but you're going to get through it, and you're going to be able to think about, what new innovation are you going to bring? And, we did some work, during the '08 recession. And if you look at, we have an index that looks at top innovative companies. And if you plot the 50 most innovative companies over the last 5 years, they've really outperformed the rest of the market from going into the '08 crisis and then coming out. And that innovation and really thinking about new ways to engage your customers is what's going to create, something that is going to be long-term and lasting and sustainable. And so, I think that, again, in times like this, it's always tough to think long-term because you're just trying to survive the now. But companies that are able to do both, we really see outside returns in the long term. So it was a lot to throw at you, and I know probably tried to pack too much in, but hopefully a little bit of a setup for how, we started to think about why this is so important and why we reached out to engage both the Washington Roundtable and Challenge Seattle, and I think that the partnership they've created with policymakers on really thinking through how do we help employers think through all the different challenges out there, the many different metrics and data inputs as they're trying to balance when can they restart, but then also what can they do now to get ready. And so in partnership with the Washington Roundtable and Challenge Seattle, we really felt like moving from both assessing the economic impact, which is kind of where we started, but moving to more, how to think about what is a baseline set of recommendations that employers can still, again, these are not hard policies, but I think they're best practices based on a lot of inputs from both the health professionals, epidemiologists, as well as policymakers around what makes the most sense to start now. And so really this is about moving from only essential businesses allowed to operate in a relatively kind of normal way with new policies to essential and or safe businesses allowed to operate in a new normal. And we fully believe that all companies have every incentive to want to do this. And it's really just helping them understand the priorities and where to invest, given limited time and energy right now and resources available, and how to prioritize what's going to help support your employees, create a safe environment for your customers, and then what are some of the things that are nice to have, that depending on your situation, the sector, and the risk level, you can decide whether it makes sense. But each plan should really be tailored for your own specific situation. And so what we pulled together, and again, these checklists can be found on both the Challenge Seattle website as well as the Washington Roundtable website, is a list of baseline recommendations that, again, are informed from many different stakeholder interviews that we've had, as well as our work globally. And really hopefully build a baseline set that you can put into your planning to help restart in a safe way. And then there's a longer list of additional considerations that you can think through which ones make sense to apply. So I won't go through in detail because again the full report can be accessed on those two websites. But what we tried to do was break down the foundational set of recommendations into workplace safety. So what are some of the things that are really going to create a safe environment for your workforce? I've heard a number of questions around masks, around how to screen employees coming in. I think there is a standard set of questions and recommendations that we would have that we would recommend as you restart, and a lot of that is more voluntary, and you need to balance with privacy, but at the same time really encourage creating an environment where if they have symptoms, they stay home. If they have a confirmed case, they let people know who they came into contact with and help with the tracing aspects. And so a number of things on the workplace safety. The second bucket is around workforce support, and that's for a number of the workers that you have, whether it be providing them with masks, whether that be around alternative work assignments or flexibility, given that childcare is still, one of the primary impediments to some people being able to get back to a normal work schedule as the economy opens up again, as well as new training and new ways to help workers understand the new way of working. And then finally, a bucket on customer and visitor expectations. And again, it's hard to mandate, but at the same time, we do think visible signage and ways to really encourage the customers that you're interacting with to really share in the responsibilities to create a safe environment for both the workers as well as the customers. And so finding a way to communicate that in a clear way upon entry and on your websites and different ways you engage with your customers, again, will just further help create an environment that everyone will feel safe and rebuild trust. And again, also keep the spread of the virus down, which is our number one goal throughout this. And then there's the longer list on workplace safety checklists, as well as workforce support that again are not part of the foundational recommendation list, but hopefully inspiration for additional elements that you can invest in when it makes sense for your individual situation. And, just a few considerations as you think about implementation. All employers should develop their own unique plans, but again, hopefully this is just helpful guiding you. We have full confidence that here in the greater Seattle area, all companies really have the incentive to create a safe environment for all. And I think you've seen that with your reaction to flattening the curve, that we've done a great job, and how do we continue to do that, but at the same time, get people back to work. And plans should be self-monitored and updated regularly. I think that is something that, we've seen some benefit in tasking somebody on your team to really help ensure that you're following some of the guidelines that you're putting in place and communicating it regularly to your workforce. As your workforce has changed, as new people come online, as you bring back more and more workers, continuing to maintain that communication and those standards, and also share it publicly and externally, and let people know that these are the things that you're doing to again create a safe environment for customers to come back. And the final one is employers should be prepared to take additional measures, as public health requires. All of this can be done without adhering to your local and state public health officials. And so, as those prerequisites are maintained and we feel good about reopening the economy, hopefully these will only build on top of that to maintain that environment for us all, again, to support the local economy and support getting people back to work and at the same time ensuring we have capacity to support our health professionals. Just final plug, the Get Back to Work New Normal Planning Checklist, as well as our report, can be found at the Challenge Seattle and Washington Roundtable websites. And then there's a number of other perspectives that are in here that I'll share links to the team in Bellevue as well. With that, I think I got through it all, Joe.
You did a great job.
A little bit of a whirlwind.
That is a lot. There are a ton of folks that are asking if they can get a copy of your PowerPoint here. Is that something we can make available to them, or just send them to the checklist site?
Yeah, for the checklist, you'll be able to find that last section fully on there. So I'd like to direct the engagement to both the Challenge Seattle and Washington Roundtable teams. They've been great partners throughout this and engaged in the work. And then Joe, we'll connect offline, and I'll find ways to share the rest of the material.
Great. So there's a couple questions that are coming in, because I know you've done a lot of work on the what does it take to get ready from a PPE standpoint. Is your sense in your conversations with folks that folks are going to be kind of loosely defining internally as an industry or as a company what it is they're going to need to provide their employees, or is there going to be a set standard that is more clearly defined in some regulatory fashion?
Yeah, I'm definitely not the one to speculate on what policies are going to put in place. But I would say all of our clients are really thinking through both, what are some of those policies going to be as kind of a baseline, and then where does it make sense to actually create a common standard, especially for some of our clients that work in multiple different states and multiple countries, trying to think through the complexity of having these different standards at each local level. And so really, what is the minimum standard that they need to keep their employees safe? And then what is any delta with local health authorities that might be on top of that? But I think we're all still figuring out, how much is going to be mandated in a broad way.
The companies that you've worked for and that you've surveyed, what are they expecting to do with their workforce? Let's be more specific. If you've got a largely office-based person that you're working with, or that you've surveyed, not manufacturing or anything like that, but an office worker, is there a new normal to continue the teleworking that we've seen over the last few months, or are they really anxious to start getting people physically back into a space?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different factors that we're seeing come through. One is, each different type of activity is impacted differently from a productivity standpoint, and so I think where they're seeing less productivity impact, people are feeling good from working from home, those are going to be the last to move. And we've already seen some announcements where they're enabling work from home in those situations until the end of 2020. We've seen some that are into the end of the summer. And so I think there is still going to be a phased rollout as far as bringing people back in, with the people that are less impacted from a productivity standpoint being last. I think then there's a question of, what is the setup in the office, and how do you create physical distancing, which I think we all think is going to be part of just best practices for the medium term here. And so, what is the right level of capacity that you can do in a safe way? And then I think the other element is just both from a phased rollout as far as when people come back, but also trying to stagger start and end times, again, to try to reduce the number of everyone coming at the same time, and making sure that, they find ways to maintain the physical distancing, as well as all the other policies they put in place to keep people safe.
Well, Steve, we got to thank you so much for the work that you've been doing on this. A lot of folks were looking for someone that had a head start on the type of survey work and research and guidance that Boston Consulting has been able to provide under the partnership with Washington Roundtable and Challenge Seattle. And so I know there are a lot of business owners and industries out there that are very grateful that this work has been done in the timeline that it's been done, and are very hopeful that regulators and the state will be aggressive in adopting some of these principles, so that industries know where they need to go. And we'll certainly be watching very intently on what the governor announces on Friday, and the path that he will put his state on. So thank you so much, Steve, for joining us, and we'll make sure to get all the links out there to send folks to the appropriate places to get access to this checklist and other information about the presentation here today. So thanks so much, Steve.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks. I want to thank everyone for participating today and for taking time to spend with us, particularly our two speakers, Steve and Lisa from the Department of Commerce. We've got a full lineup of other webcasts that I hope you will take some time to participate with, starting with this coming Tuesday, when we'll be joined by key Washington state legislators on the issue of infrastructure and transportation. That webcast will be moderated by former Washington State Transportation Secretary Paula Hammond. And then on Thursday of next week, we'll be welcoming Bellevue School Superintendent Ivan Duran, as well as Washington State Secretary of Children, Youth, and Families Ross Hunter. as well as Superintendent Chris Reichdahl, who just confirmed, in fact, why we were holding this webcast here today. A very important webcast on the future of education and childcare, something that I know many of us, especially my family with a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old here at home, know a lot about. You can register for these and other programs at the conclusion of this webcast or anytime at bellevuechamber.org. Finally, I want to wish my oldest son, Moxon,